Welcome back, class. So we'll continue a quick recap of what we did in the previous class. So we discussed patriotic exaltation in the Elizabethan age that happened, and then we also saw a few things about the translations and their influence on the writers of the Elizabethan age. The beautiful phrase that he uses is fertilized by a deep layer of translations. The rich soil of the Elizabethan literature was fertilized by a deep layer of translations. A beautiful image you get there. Right? So by 1579, many of the great works of ancient and modern times had been translated into English. Practically all the great books of the past and the present were brought under translation. That's one reason why even today translated works have their own merit, because it gives us an idea or an inkling about other worlds, how they express themselves in their language. And you get other ideas, other thoughts, other points of view. And Philemon Holland was called the translator general of his age. Right? You can make a note of that. Philemon Holland was called the translator general of his age. See, he was also a good humanist. That's also very important, because only because he was a humanist, he had the propensity or the inclination to translate books for the benefit of the larger humanity. And we saw this, and then we saw patriotic exaltation that happened. Uh, Elizabeth, who was to name the great period, had been 20 years on the throne before a definitive step had been taken by two successive advances. What are the two? In 1578. The year 1578 is also very important for many reasons. Like 1516 in the annals of English literature is important. After 1516, when Thomas More's Utopia was published. And then, it was translated into English in 1551, if I'm right. But 1516, a whole lot of publications happened. Similarly, 1578 is also important for many social and literary reasons. 1578, while Drake was sailing round the world, the other in 1589, on the motto of the Armada, by which England caught up with her continental rivals. Two important things propelled Elizabeth to be one of the best queens of England. So by the year 1578, John Lilly's Euphuism appeared. Edmund Spencer's Shepherd's Calendar and all of Sidney's work in verse and prose was written at about the same time. So 1578 is a defining year for the Elizabethan age and for English literature in general. So we'll be looking a brief glimpse at the pioneers. We call them Lilly, Sidney, and Spencer in the order. However, Sidney doesn't get any merit during his lifetime, and so he was published posthumously after his death. And so we have the Lilly, Spencer, and Sidney in that order. And please remember, all three were called pioneers. You know who is a pioneer? And why were they called pioneers? I'll just give you a few lines from Kazamian's, right? That wonderful book on history of English literature, where he says, I'll just read it out for you. The first paragraph of chapter number 2 from the history of English literature. The three men, Lilly, Sidney, and Spencer, the three men who about 1578 simultaneously, although with very unequal resources, were initiators of the literature dedicated to beauty. What a beautiful term, initiators of the literature dedicated to beauty. And the prose of such romances as Euphuism and Arcadia is entirely poetic. And I'll just tell you why were they called pioneers and what makes their work special. A pioneer is a person who sets the trend, right, for the others to emulate. He or she is the first person to carve a niche in that particular field area. Then they develop something new, something original. What Catherine Belsey tells us, no, something new, something original. And this in turn helps others to emulate them, to imitate them, to follow them. So if a person is a pioneer in the field of technology, they set the trend for others. They first establish themselves there, and then they help others to follow suit. Others imitate them, emulate them. So they are called pioneers. And these three are called pioneers: Lily, Sydney, and Spencer. Why are they called pioneers? First, we'll have a quick look at, just give me a minute, John Lilly. Right? I'm just giving you a few ideas on how to focus better on John Lilly. Uh, I'll read out a sentence for you from this book again. John Lilly, we all know, was that Christopher Marlowe was called Shakespeare's guru in tragedy. Guru, right? Mentor. He looked up in tragedy. And John Lilly was a heavy, huge influence to Shakespeare in comedy, as well as, in his plays in general. Right? So John Lilly has a great, as a university wit also. Please remember the university wits had a tremendous influence on the subsequent generation of dramatists and writers also. The university wits, right? How they heralded a new path, a new way for the others to emulate. So Lilly, John Lilly, is known for his characteristic style, something that he pioneered. What is that? It is called Euphuism, right? It is exactly pronounced as Euphuism, right? Euphuise or Euphuism. So here, what is Euphuism? The word EU, any word that begins with EU, we all know means pleasant, good, graceful. Euphemism, we know, no? Substitution, substituting a pleasant word instead of a harsh word. Like instead of saying, he died, you use a euphemism. He passed away. That's called a euphemism, a pleasant word instead of a bit of a harsh word that will have a harsher effect on a person. So the same here also, euphuis is derived again from Greek. That means graceful, right, or witty. And if you remember, we would have discussed the educationists and Roger Ascham in a schoolmaster. We discussed that. Remember, in one of our earlier classes, we discussed Roger Ascham's The Schoolmaster. There, Roger Ascham describes Euphuis as a type of student who is graceful and witty. I'll just give you that description that he gives. Apt by goodness of wit and grace, and pliable by readiness of will to learning, having all other qualities of the mind and parts of the body that must another day serve learning, he says, right? So what is Euphuism? What is the style that he pioneered? It's a very interesting style. It's called a mannered style, an artificial style, which has parallel arrangements in it. I'll just give you that word that Kazamian uses. Just give me a minute. Symmetry. There are, I'm just reading from Kazamian, there are in Euphuism two distinct elements. There is first a principle of counterpoise and symmetry in sentences, a way of balancing clauses. I'll give you an example of a euphuistic sentence like 3 points you should bear in mind. Phrases of equal length. I repeat, phrases. A phrase is not a complete sentence. A phrase is just a group of words. Phrases of equal length appear in succession. I repeat, phrases of equal length appear in succession. I'll give you an example from Euphuism. It is virtue that maketh gentleman, that maketh the poor rich, the base born noble, the subject a sovereign, the deformed beautiful, the sick whole, the weak strong, the most miserable most happy. Continuing, there are two principal and peculiar gifts in the nature of man, knowledge and reason. The one commandeth, and the other obeyeth. These things neither the whirling wheel of fortune can change, neither the deceitful cavillings of worldlings separate, neither sickness abate, neither age abolish. Now you find symmetry, balance in sentences. This was something he pioneered. What is the style? It is called Euphuism. 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 And what is Euphuism all about? Phrases of equal length appear in quick succession. And there is a balance of key important verbal elements in successive sentences. And there is a balance, there is a symmetry. I'll read again this wonderful example for you from Euphuism, The Anatomy of Wit, 1578. It is virtue that maketh gentlemen, that maketh the poor rich, the base born noble, the subject a sovereign, the deformed beautiful, the sick whole, the weak strong, the most miserable most happy. There are two principal and peculiar gifts in the nature of man, knowledge and reason. The one commandeth, and the other obeyeth. These things neither the whirling wheel of fortune can change, neither the deceitful cavillings of whirlings separate, neither sickness abate, neither age abolish. This is the style that he invented or pioneered. That was something so appealing to the sensibility of the Elizabethans. And please remember, I remember a beautiful interview by Noam Chomsky where he talks about how, he gives a very startling observation when he's asked to comment on uh, language, the power of language and how languages evolve, right? And he's asked to give his opinion on French, English, and German. You know what he says? Noam Chomsky, I think he's part of the Jaipur Literary Fest also that's happening now. So Noam Chomsky says French is the language of the sciences because it is direct. And the French people don't like beating about the bush, highly rhetorical, ornate, embellished sentences. English and German, he says, are languages of literature, of literary merit. I was also surprised, when he said this. He said French is the language of the sciences, and English and German are languages of literature because they are highly ornate, highly embellishing, and highly decorative. So I'll just give you another example from Kazamian's, Legui and Kazamian. What's that? Yeah. Simple alliterations are there, like hot liver of a heedless lover. The hot liver of a heedless lover. Interesting, isn't it? One more. Let my rude birth excuse my bold request. Let my rude birth excuse my bold request. The hot liver of a heedless lover. Let my rude birth excuse my bold request. So if you are asked to give examples of euphuism, you can cite this, right? The hot liver of a heedless lover, let my rude birth excuse my bold request. So he was one of the first who said that even prose could attain the language of verse. I repeat, he was the first or the pioneer to say that even prose could be as measured or attain the elevated language of verse or poetry. So that's why, they say about him that he made prose a vehicle of art on the same level with poetry. See, beautiful, no? He made prose a vehicle of art on the same, on par with poetry. Although his style was artificial, elaborate, pompous, embellished, highly ornate, highly decorated, his comedies also you find it. Why was that? Because he wanted language to have a charm within itself. Now, again, I'll just like to take you back to Noam Chomsky, who again, when he was asked, what is your opinion on slang? When he was asked, what is your opinion on slang in language? Any language will have a lot of vocabulary that pertains to what is called slang. So why do you think slang exists? He was asked, right, in one of his interviews. The answer he gave was very, very, appealing to me also. So he said, people people want to be innovative. Usually, people want to be innovative. And when they find that the language that they speak or write is restrictive or doesn't help them come out with their own thoughts, they want to come out with new sets of vocabulary. Because everyone wants what is called change for the better. This happens even in society, in the clothes that we wear. 20 years ago, when we were students, not 20, 25 years ago, when we were students, our, the clothes that we wore were different. When we started off. After that, there was a gradual change. So similarly, the technology that we used was something different. We had what is called pagers, numeric pagers, alphanumeric pagers, Motorola pages. We still remember, short matchbox size pages were there. 1990s, 80s, 1990s. They were a rage and a sensation back then. You all must have known, you all must have seen. But then pages disappeared, went into oblivion or faded into oblivion, and the next technology took over. Like in those days, we had the floppy disk. You all must have known the floppy disk. How they played a very pivotal role in the computers. Right? Without the floppy disk, you couldn't save something. And the space there for memory was much, 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 much less. But still, a floppy disk was venerated or something preserved. We had special cases for preserving floppy disks. Then came the CDs. Then came the DVDs. Then came the MDs, the mini discs, the compact, a whole lot of changes came. Now we don't even have the CDs or the DVDs or the floppy disks. Now we have what is called USB drives. So like that. Language also changes. And society, as society evolves, and people like change, and some people, some of these writers who see the gap, who sense the gap, and then try to fill in the gap, they're the ones who are called pioneers. They are called pioneers. They sense a great gap in society, and so they feel that this gap needs to be addressed or redressed. Remember when in our research we spoke about filling the missing gap. So that's what Lilly also does here. Right? And he was not that great when he was a student, although he came from an illustrious family of grammarians. I'll just give you that. A line from Kazamian. Remember William Lilly, whom we discussed in the Humanists, right? The father of Euphuism was born of a family of grammarians. I'm reading from Kazamian's History of English Literature. He was the grandson of William Lilly, who was the friend of Erasmus and more. Now you can see the connect. He came from a family of grammarians. He studied at Oxford, 1575. I still remember 1575. No, last week, I think, Homi Bhabha, a pioneer of post-colonial studies, he said in the 1975, he did his studies at Oxford, right, 1575. William, who is that? John Lilly. And then 1975, see, our own Homi Bhabha, right, he studied at Oxford. He also did his PhD there. Remember, if you remember, I also put up his interview on our academic blog where he talks about how he had to wait for a whole summer to get inspiration for his doctoral thesis. So, yes, that was just a post-colonial connect for us. Now, where are we? Yeah. So he had an illustrious lineage. He was the grandson of William Lilly, but unfortunately, he couldn't get a fellowship at Oxford. A fellowship in the sense, he couldn't get into Oxford in either the administrative or a teaching position. Unfortunate for him because he aspired to become a fellow at Oxford after his studies, but he couldn't. So what happened was he started, uh, he tried his luck at the court because there were only two options open for educated gentlemen in those days. Here, there is no word about educated ladies or women. Only educated gentlemen who had all the privileges and the opportunities available for them. So there were just two opportunities. One was they had to pursue advancement in academics, or they had to go to court, try their luck in the court. And 1578, Lilly joined the household of the Earl of Oxford, and he served there. He wrote some plays for them, and then, right, he wrote his Euphuism, The Anatomy of Wit, which, although he wrote a lot of plays also before that, but his literary fame rests only on his Euphuism or The Anatomy of Wit. They call it an extraordinary success, right? Euphuism, because of the ornate style. I told you the ornate style that he uses there, Euphuism. And where did he get the name? From Roger Ascham's, the schoolmaster. Right. Where are we? Yeah. So we also discussed a few of the salient features of what Euphuism is. You have principles of balance and antithesis, and you have what is called phrases of equal length that appear in succession. and the balance of key verbal elements in successive sentences. I gave you that example. It is virtue that maketh gentleman, that maketh the poor rich, the base born noble, the subject equal length. Phrases of equal length appear in quick succession. That maketh the poor rich, the base born noble, the subject is sovereign, the deformed beautiful, the sick whole, the weak strong, the most miserable most happy. Phrases of equal length appear in quick succession. The next one I said about euphuism is the balance of key verbal elements. There is a balance that gives symmetry. What is that balance? I'll read out that example. There are two principal and peculiar gifts in the nature of man, knowledge and reason. The one commandeth and the other obeyeth. These things neither the whirling wheel of fortune can change, neither the deceitful cavillings of worldlings separate, neither sickness abate, neither age abolish. I give you another example also of a symmetry or balance in sentences where the sounds and the syllables also have a corresponding balance or they balance each other. The hot liver of a heedless lover. I repeat, the hot liver of a heedless lover. Let my rude birth excuse my bold request. And here there's a beautiful line about Lily from Kesami. And only, these two can give us these wonderful lines that you don't find anywhere else in the World Wide Web. Unfortunately, Lily knew books well and nature ill. Look at that. I love this sentence. Unfortunately, Lily knew books well and nature ill. Ill means less. He therefore had the idea of finding ornaments for his prose in ancient mythology and history and in fantastic notions of natural history borrowed from Pliny the Elder. So look at that. Like James Fraser or Sir James Fraser did not have a first-hand account of human beings. He did not have a first-hand account. He was an armchair anthropologist who got all his inspiration from hearsay or second-hand sources, which he passed off as anthropology, especially his jottings and notings on the East. Now, this is about Lily, right? I'll just give you one more interesting uh, information about Lily. He was drawn into the Mark Prelate controversy. What is the Mark Prelate controversy? It was a scandal or a controversy where someone wrote under the pseudonym called Martin Marprelate. Martin Marprelate. Martin Marprelate. 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 And why did they write under pseudonyms? Because otherwise they'll be arrested. You know how Thomas More was killed. He died as a martyr. In those days, you can't boldly express your points of view. There was no freedom of expression. Right? And so if you spoke your mind or your heart immediately, you were uh, either punished, imprisoned, or killed. So there was somebody who was very angry with the hierarchy of the church. I mean, the established Church of England. The hierarchy there, it antagonized them. They did not like it. Somebody, we don't know who it was. And so they wrote pamphlets because otherwise we don't have WhatsApps or Facebook or Instagram where we can instantly connect with people all across the world. Just visualize yourself as a 16th century subject, as a 16th century citizen, like H.G. Wells in his time machine. You know, transports the protagonist to the past, the distant past, the future to the distant future. Like that, just visualize yourself for a second being transported to the 16th century, like what happens in Dr. Faustus by Christopher Marlowe. So, if you visualize yourself then as a citizen in the Elizabethan age, how will you connect there? How will you see for yourself firsthand what's happening there? Only people in the court were acknowledged or celebrated, were given an authentic voice, the others were relegated to the margins, and you can't speak anything against the queen or the king. If you said anything, you had to use pseudonyms or you had to be very subtle. You can't boldly voice your opinion. The moment you do that, you might be imprisoned, incarcerated, or killed, martyred. That's the word for Thomas More. So these pamphlets, like in every newspapers, you get pamphlets, that come along with these newspapers. Like that, these pamphlets were actually flyers that attacked the hierarchy of the established church. So Lilly sided with the church, and he was, these were written by radical Puritans. So Lilly was with the Church of England, the established church, because the church sided with the establishment, the rulers. So here, after that, and he was one of the few writers, like even Sydney, who also became a member of parliament. He was MP, member of parliament, 4 times: 1589, 1593, 1597, and 1601. Like Jeffrey Archer, when he gave his interview last, if you remember, last month, he spoke for a program in India where he talks about how he was a member of parliament, and although he was a member of parliament, for he didn't like being a member of parliament because he found his call in writing. Right, he says that. And remember, he gave this interview, I think a couple of months back. It's there on my blog. You can look it up anytime. When he was 80 years old, right? He must be currently running 81 now. So, yes, right. He was a member of parliament, like Jeffrey Archer, like Philip Sidney, and yes, right. That's about John Lilly, and you can read more of Lilly because Lilly influenced a whole lot of writers who came after him, especially, his language was a great influence on subsequent writers like Shakespeare. I'll just give you a few examples, even as we read the others, right? Yeah. Now, after Lilly, we have the next person. It's called Edmund Spenser. Right? Edmund Spenser is also called a pioneer for many reasons. I told you, he also developed a unique verse style, Spenser. Uh, his vocabulary, his style, and how he applied them in his writings. Uh, he combined both the philosophic and the literary in his writings. That's why he is considered one of the most important poets of the 16th century. He was also educated, right? Unlike Shakespeare, he was educated at the university. Like John Lilly was educated at Oxford, Spenser was educated at Cambridge. All three were almost born about the same time, right? Who are the three? The pioneers, Lilly, Sidney, and Spenser. They were born almost around the same time, 1552 to 1554. We're not exactly sure about the year they were born. That's why it is inferred or assumed they were born in 1552 or 1553, right? Either of these years, all three. And all three came out with their important publications by 1578 or 1579. And all three were pioneers in the realm of language. And all three had successors, imitators who emulated them, who looked upon them as great sources of inspiration. So, Spencer was also connected with the rulers. So, he also got the acquaintance of Philip Sidney, who was a poet, and his first published work was The Shepherd's Calendar, which he dedicates to Sidney. So, The Shepherd's Calendar, you must have known very well by now. It has 12 pastoral eclogues between, they are kind of conversations between highly idealized shepherds. Of course, it has a lot of connotations, connects with the political and religious problems of the age of the contemporary society. The Protestant factions, the Catholic factions, all those things come there, right? So then by 1589, the Fairy Queen was almost complete. But it was Walter Raleigh who visited the poet, and he was so impressed with the poet's work that he was the one who took Spencer with him back to England, and he motivated him to write and published it. And he also requested or asked him to dedicate the Fairy Queen to Queen Elizabeth. So the Fairy Queen, now you understand who is the Fairy Queen of the title. The original title of the Fairy Queen, this is not to be found anywhere on the internet, if right, I suppose it should not be there. The original title of the Fairy Queen was the Pageant, Pagants, Pageants. But later on, at the request of Sir Walter Raleigh, the great explorer, Hawkins, Drake, Frobisher, Raleigh, Sir Walter Raleigh, he changed the title and he gave a very elaborate dedication to Queen Elizabeth. And Spencer's ambition was to write a great epic in 12 cantos. And who was his inspiration for that? The Greek philosopher Aristotle. Because he came out to the 12 moral virtues. He was the one to classify all 12 moral virtues. Based on this, he wanted to write 12 cantos. And each of these virtues was to be embodied by a particular knight. So the book had a combination of chivalric romance, morals, manners, and it reflected the character of the nation. So, in the historic context, if you can read this poem, you will understand a whole lot of other interesting things about society in general, right, during the time of the Elizabethan age, right? So, I have an example for you. I'll read it out. Right. I'll just read it for you. From Kazamian, Legui and Kazamian's page number 268. Since Sidney's works did not appear until after his death, it was Spencer who first revealed poetic beauty to his generation. Remember, we saw in the first chapter, the opening chapter, the three men who about 1578 simultaneously, although with very unequal resources, were initiators of the literature dedicated to beauty. Initiators or pioneers of the literature dedicated to beauty. Now you find Spencer It was Spencer who first revealed poetic beauty to his generation. So, what about Lilly? Lilly revealed prose beauty. Spencer revealed poetic beauty. Lilly was the first or the pioneer to attest or to prove that even prose could come to the level of poetry, right, because of its ornate, embellished language. So it was Spencer who first revealed poetic beauty to his generation. That means who was the first to reveal prose beauty to his generation? The previous one, right? John Lilly, who came out with this Euphuism. For the England of 1579, the appearance of the Shepherd's Calendar inaugurated a period of self-confidence and vast hopes. Right. Uh, One more about the Shepherd's Calendar. With that, we'll stop. In a Shepherd's Calendar, his humanist taste combines with his love for the soil. He was a humanist, so his humanist taste combines with his love for the soil. He nationalizes his eclogues by pungent words borrowed from the old poets of his country and from provincial vocabularies. This is very important, right? Provincial vocabularies. Thus, he makes free imitations of Theocritus, Virgil, Bion, and all these, ancient writers. Right. So this is about the Shepherd's Calendar. Um, he writes under a name called Colin Clout. So if you are asked, not here, you won't be asked here, but in other competitive exams, if you're asked, who is Colin Clout? Colin Clout is his pastoral name for himself. Like every writer will have their mouthpiece in their masterpiece, especially like Thomas More's Utopia. You have Ralph Hythlodays, the mouthpiece of Thomas More, right? Ralph Hythloday, who it interestingly happens to be his masterpiece also. Like that, Spencer writes Spencer's pastoral name for himself is Colin Clout. Um, so it is a painting of himself, right? So I'll just read it out for you. Some of the shepherds change each month of each of them correspond to a month in the year. Some of the shepherds change, but others reappear, especially Colin Clout, about whom they center. Excuse me, in whom the poet paints himself. All right. So there we stop for now. We'll continue with the last pioneer there. Right? After Lilly and Sydney, I wanted to finish off the pioneers today, but good. Now we'll do Spencer in the next class, and then we'll go to the other uh, aspects of the age. Thank you. That's all for now. We'll continue the next class. Have a good day.